My sister stood 4 feet from me at a nurse's station on the 4th floor, looked a charge nurse directly in the eye, and said, "She's not family. She doesn't need to be back there." My name is Corinne. I'm 38 years old. I manage health information for a hospital system 2 hours north of that one, which is a polite way of saying, I spend my working life making sure the correct document is in the correct chart on the day somebody's life depends on it. Our mother had been in that intensive care unit for 9 hours before I knew she'd had a stroke. Nobody called me. I found out from a 19-year-old with a cracked phone screen who typed, "Grandma is at the hospital, and Mom says, don't come." I drove 111 miles before sunrise, with a string tie envelope riding on the passenger seat, and I walked through those sliding doors at 6:40 in the morning to hear myself described, out loud, in a public hallway, as a stranger. My sister was certain of 2 things when she said it: that the woman in that bed could no longer contradict her, and that nobody in that building had any reason on earth to believe me over her. What she hadn't counted on was that the answer had been sitting in our mother's medical record for 4 years, uploaded on a Tuesday afternoon, while the woman herself sat in my passenger seat, complaining about my air conditioning. Before I tell you what that charge nurse did with her hands when she heard the word family, tell me, what time is it where you are right now? And where are you watching from? I always wonder how far a story like this travels. Welcome back to Karma's Keeper, where the quiet one in the family usually turns out to be the one holding the only copy that matters. If you've ever been the person your relatives call when there's a form to fill out, and forget when there's a room to sit in, this one is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. But let me take you back 24 years, to a kitchen table in a town called Bellwood, and a telephone cord long enough to reach the back step. Bellwood is 40 minutes south of Dayton, and it smells, in the summer, like fabric softener from the laundromat, and hot gravel from the lot behind the grain elevator. 600 people, 1 traffic light that blinked yellow after 9 at night. The Dairy Queen closed in October, and everybody talked about it like a season ending. My father was a lineman for the County Electric Cooperative. Ray. He had a laugh you could hear from the driveway, and hands that had been burned enough times that the scars had their own geography. He died at 47, on a Sunday, in the front seat of his truck in the co-op parking lot before his shift. My mother was a cafeteria manager at the elementary school. She could feed 240 children in 19 minutes, and she could not, at that point in her life, read a single page of an insurance document without her hands starting to shake. I was 14. 3 weeks after the funeral, a letter came from the life insurance carrier. Denial. A technicality about a policy conversion my father had signed at work and never finished. I remember the paper was thin enough to see the kitchen light through. I called them from the wall phone with the long cord, sitting on the back step so I could hear over the noise inside. In the living room, my older sister was on the couch with a wad of tissues and a ring of aunts around her, and I could hear my Aunt Pauline saying, "Let her be. She's taking it so hard." The hold music was a saxophone. I had a spiral notebook on my knee, and I wrote down every name they gave me, every reference number, the exact time of each call. At some point, my mother came out and stood behind the screen door. "What are you doing out here, honey?" "I'm on hold." She was quiet for a second. Then she said the sentence that would organize the next 24 years of my life, without either of us understanding what it did. "You're so good at that." She meant it kindly. I want to be fair to her. She meant it the way you'd tell a child they were good at spelling. But in our family, being good at something meant you were now responsible for it, permanently, and it meant that nobody would ever count it as love. It took me 11 weeks and a written appeal I typed at the school library to get that policy paid. I was 15 by the time the check arrived. Nobody in that house ever mentioned it again. Except once, at a cousin's wedding, when Pauline introduced me to a woman from her church as the practical one, her sister's the emotional one. I have thought about that sentence more than I would like to admit. Here's what our family valued. It valued caretaking you could see. Casseroles. Crying at the right moments. Showing up loud. Arriving with photographs. Saying the thing everyone was thinking. My sister was extraordinary at all of it. She'd walk into a room of grieving people, and she'd know exactly which hand to hold, and people would say for weeks afterward that they didn't know what they'd have done without her. And what I did, the appeals, the prior authorizations, the Part D enrollment windows, the letters written in the language institutions actually answer to, that was clerical. That was Corinne being Corinne. It happened somewhere off screen, like plumbing. I built a life out of it anyway. I started at 19 as a ward clerk at a nursing home in Springfield, filing folders in a basement room that was always 11 degrees colder than the rest of the building. I got my records technician credential at 22, taking classes at night. Coding, then auditing, then a supervisor job at a critical access hospital, where I learned what happens when a document exists, but nobody can find it at 3 a.m. At 34, I became the Director of Health Information Management for a 4-hospital system. My whole career is one idea, really. A record has to be where the crisis is, not in a drawer, not in a lawyer's office in a different county. In the chart, indexed correctly, on the day someone stops being able to speak for themselves. My mother's heart went into atrial fibrillation the spring I turned 34. 4 days in the hospital, a cardioversion, a new pill organizer, and a discharge packet nobody read but me. 2 weeks after she came home, I drove down and found her at the kitchen table with a coffee cup she wasn't drinking from, and a green ballpoint pen. "I want to do the paperwork," she said. "The one where you say what you want. An advance directive. That's it." She turned the pen over. "And I want to name somebody." I said, carefully, that most people in her position would name the child who lived closest. Her older daughter's house was 6 miles from that kitchen. Mine took 2 hours on a good day. She looked at me over the top of her glasses for a long moment. "Somebody has to witness it," she said. "I want it to be the one who reads the whole thing." We did it properly. I would not have accepted it any other way, and neither would she once I explained why. We used the state's statutory form, 2 witnesses who weren't related to her and weren't going to inherit anything, our neighbor Ruth Ann Colvin, who wore her reading glasses on top of her head the entire time, and a notary at the credit union with a stamp she kept in a plastic case. Mom initialed every page. She wrote her wishes about ventilators and feeding tubes in her own handwriting, in a box the form provided, and her handwriting that day was firm and upright and entirely hers. She named me as her healthcare agent. She named her older daughter as the alternate. I want you to hear that. She didn't cut anybody out. She just put things in an order. Then she slid the original across the table to me, inside a manila envelope with a red string closure. The old kind, with 2 paper buttons, and a string you wind in a figure 8 to close. She'd had it in the drawer under the phone for 30 years. It used to hold the deed to my father's truck. "You keep it," she said. "You're the one who won't lose it." 2 days later, I drove her up to my system's release of information office on my day off, and had it scanned into her medical record while she sat in the passenger seat, telling me my air conditioning was going to give her bronchitis. Document type: Advance Directive / Healthcare Power of Attorney. 4 pages, indexed under her medical record number, time-stamped, available to any facility in the regional exchange that requested it. 14 minutes of work. I didn't think about it again for 4 years. Now, if you've ever been the person who fixes the problem while somebody else receives the sympathy, the one who handles the phone calls and the forms and the fine print, and then gets described to strangers as practical, drop a comment. Just one word. I want to know I'm not the only one who understands what it feels like to be trusted with everything and included in nothing. The text came in at 5:47 on a Saturday morning. It was from my niece. 19, second year at a community college in Springfield. A cracked screen she refused to fix because she said it gave the phone character. "Grandma is at the hospital. She had a stroke last night. Mom says don't come." I read it 3 times. I want to describe what happened in my body accurately, because it wasn't grief yet. Grief needed information I didn't have. It was the specific sensation of the floor tilting a few degrees. Unmoored. Like standing on a boat you didn't know you'd boarded. Last night. Not this morning. Last night. I called my niece. She picked up on the first ring, whispering, and she'd been awake all night in a waiting room chair. When did she come in? Like 9 o'clock? Maybe earlier. Aunt Pauline got there before us. 9 hours. 9 hours of neurology consults and imaging and consent conversations, and I had been asleep in my apartment with my phone face up on the nightstand. Then I asked the question I already knew the answer to. Who's been talking to the doctors? Mom. I sat on the edge of my bed for a minute doing what I do at work, which is separating what I know from what I assume. Here's what I knew. My mother had been living alone in that house until February, when my sister and her husband moved into the back bedroom to help. I knew because I'd been told after the fact, by our aunt, in a text with 3 exclamation points. I knew that my calls to that house had been going to voicemail since April, and that when I got through, my mother sounded pleasant and vague, and always seemed to be handing the phone to somebody. I knew I'd paid $6,200 over 3 years for her hearing aids, her dental work, and the medications her plan wouldn't cover, and that not one person in that house had ever mentioned it out loud. What I assumed was that this was disorganization. Panic. A daughter overwhelmed in an emergency room forgetting to make a call. I put on clothes and I called Priya, who runs compliance at my system, and has been my friend since we were both auditors nobody listened to. She answered like she'd been expecting it, which is what good friends do at 6 in the morning. I told her. She was quiet, and then she said 3 things I have repeated to other people many times since. Don't argue in a hallway. Whatever happens, you don't get to be the one who made a scene at the nurse's station. Ask for the patient advocate, not the nurse, not the doctor, the advocate. That's their entire job. And, bring the original. Don't tell anybody you have it until you need it. I said I was probably overreacting. She said, you might be. Bring it anyway. I stood in my hallway for a full minute after that call, arguing with myself, and I want to put the argument on the record, because I think a lot of people have had it. One side said, your mother is 71, and something has happened in her brain, and the last thing that household needs at 7 in the morning is you arriving with a document. Go be a daughter. Sit down. Say nothing. The other side said, you have watched this exact thing happen to other people's families for 19 years from the safe side of a desk. You have watched what happens when the wrong person is standing at the bedside on the day the hard question gets asked, and everyone is too polite to check. I took the envelope out of the filing cabinet in my spare room, and I did not open it. I want to be honest about why I got in the car, because it wasn't strategy. I've spent my whole adult life being the person you call. The phone number in the emergency contact field. The one who knows what a prior authorization is and what to say to make it move. And somewhere underneath the competence, there's a woman who has never once, not a single time, been the person who was simply already there, who got to sit in a chair holding a hand instead of standing in a corridor holding a folder. My mother was 71 years old, and something in her brain had come apart in the night, and I did not want to be useful. I wanted to be present. I wanted, for once, to be in the room because I belonged in it. It went on the passenger seat. At a red light on the edge of town, I caught myself winding the red string tighter around the paper buttons. Figure eight, the way she used to do it at that kitchen table. I got there at 6:40. The family lounge outside that unit was the color of oatmeal, with chairs bolted into rows and a vending machine that hummed in a key just slightly wrong. Somebody had put a jigsaw puzzle on a side table with a third of the sky missing. There was a laminated sign about visiting hours that had been laminated twice. My aunt was in the second row with a quilted bag on her lap. My cousin Denny was asleep sitting up. My brother-in-law had his cap over his eyes. My niece was in the corner with her knees up, and when she saw me she started to cry, and that's the moment I understood this was going to be worse than disorganization. Pauline stood up and hugged me and held on a beat too long. Oh, honey, you made good time. How is she? We're all just taking it 1 hour at a time. She smoothed my sleeve. You look rested, at least. Your sister hasn't slept in 2 days. If you've never been on the receiving end of it, I should explain what that is. It isn't an insult. You can't repeat it to anyone as an insult. It's a compliment with a hook in it, and by the time you feel it set, you've already said thank you. 2 more arrived over the next hour. delivered warmly by 3 different people. You always were the practical one. It's good you could get away. And my favorite, from Denny, half asleep. Man, you must have left early. You never come down. I went to the nurse's station. I gave my mother's name and my own. I asked, in the exact language I use 40 times a week at work, for an update on her condition and neurostatus. The charge nurse was a woman named Yolanda Reyes with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and the calm of somebody who has been doing this for 25 years. She started to answer me. And my sister came around the corner from the visitor's restroom, drying her hands, and said it. She's not family. She doesn't need to be back there. I've replayed the next 4 seconds, probably 1,000 times. Yolanda's hands stopped on the keyboard. Not dramatically. They just went still, the way your hands do when a sentence contradicts something you have already read. Her eyes came up and moved from my sister's face to mine, and then back down to the screen, and she said, in an even voice, "Let me get the patient advocate for you both." She had seen something. I didn't know what yet. I found out part of it 30 seconds later, when I walked past the unit's status board on my way back down the corridor. Every hospital has one. A dry erase grid, room numbers down the left side, a column for the attending, a column for the day's plan, and a column most families never notice at all, family spokesperson. My mother's room was 412. In that last column, in green marker, in somebody's careful block printing, was my sister's first name and the word daughter. Underneath it, half erased, you could still see the ghost of something that had been written and wiped. The loop of a capital letter, a fragment of a phone number with a 937 area code that was not hers. Somebody had put a name up there on the first night. Somebody else had taken it down. I didn't argue in the hallway. I want to tell you that was discipline. Partly it was shock. I stood there with the whole drive still in my shoulders, and my own sister's voice still in the air, and I couldn't have produced a sentence if you'd paid me. I went back to the lounge and sat down next to my niece. She showed me her phone. The first photo was of a document on my mother's kitchen counter, next to the sugar canister. A general durable power of attorney. 6 weeks old. Financial authority, property authority, the whole instrument, signed at the bottom in handwriting I recognized, and did not recognize at the same time. The same loops, but loose, sloping down and off the line, 3 of the letters unfinished. 6 weeks earlier, my mother had come home from 4 days of intravenous antibiotics for a urinary tract infection that had, in the words of her own discharge summary, produced acute confusion, resolving, witnessed by my brother-in-law, and by a woman named Kimberly from my sister's church. The second photo was a comparative market analysis from a realtor in Xenia. 3 pages of comps for a 3-bedroom ranch on a corner lot 2 blocks off the state route. There was a sticky note on the front. It said after. I sat in an oatmeal-colored chair, holding a 19-year-old's cracked phone, and I felt something in my chest get scoured out. My niece said, very quietly, "I found it when I was looking for the good scissors." I asked her one question. I asked whether her grandmother had been at the table when it was signed, or whether the paper had come to her. She said her mother had brought it to the recliner with a magazine underneath it for a hard surface. And then, because things arrive in the order they want to and not the order you can handle, I went to the stairwell to call Priya, and my sister was already in it, 1 flight down, on the phone. Stairwells carry. Anyone who has worked in a hospital knows that. I stopped on the landing. No, she's stable enough to move. They're just being cautious. Once we get her placed, the house can go on in the spring. A pause. No, she's not on anything. She hasn't been around. She's not on anything. She meant the deed. She meant the accounts. She meant, and this is the part I'd like you to hold on to, that the woman upstairs with the right side of her body gone quiet had no paperwork anywhere that included me. Because 6 weeks ago, at a recliner, with a magazine for a hard surface, that had been made true. Flattened is the word for it. I stood on that landing and let the sentence go all the way through me. And then something else happened, and I have never been able to explain it to anyone who doesn't do what I do for a living. I got calm. Not numb. Calm the way a room gets calm when the alarm stops and you can finally hear the actual problem. Because I had spent 19 years learning one thing, and the thing is this: a document that exists in somebody's kitchen is a rumor. A document that exists in the chart is a fact, and there is a 50-year-old body of law and hospital policy about which kind of document controls which kind of decision, and my sister had never read one page of any of it. A general durable power of attorney handles money and property. It does not, on its own, override a validly executed advance directive in which a patient has specifically named a healthcare agent. Those are different instruments doing different jobs. And I'm sure there are nurses and attorneys watching this who could explain the interaction between those two documents far better than I can. I only know it the way you know the road to your own house. I also knew something my sister could not have known, because it happened on a Tuesday 4 years ago while she was 6 miles away. That form wasn't in a drawer. It was scanned, indexed, time-stamped, and sitting in a record system that the hospital she was standing in could request in under 4 minutes. I filed that stairwell sentence the way I file every discrepancy at work: date, time, source, and what, exactly, it contradicts. Then I went back upstairs and asked at the desk when the care conference was scheduled, because there's always a care conference after the first 24 hours, and I sat down to wait. What I did next, I planned in the time it took a vending machine to drop a bottle of water. If you've ever found the proof of something you'd been talked out of believing, stay with me. Subscribe, because you'll want to see how this lands. But tell me first, would you have laid that envelope on the desk right there in the hallway the second she said it? Or would you have waited for the room where everyone was watching? The care conference was Sunday at 10 in the morning, in a windowless room off the unit, with a table that seated 8 and 11 people in it. The neurologist, a palliative care nurse practitioner with a clipboard, a social worker named Brandt, with a lanyard full of pins. Yolanda, standing, because the charge nurse always stands. Ivy Marchetti, the weekend patient advocate, in a cardigan and running shoes, holding a laptop. My aunt, my cousin, my brother-in-law, my niece, my sister, me. The envelope was in my bag. The doctor spoke for about 6 minutes. Left middle cerebral artery, right side weakness, expressive aphasia. She understood language. She could not reliably produce it. Too early to know the ceiling on recovery. She would need weeks of inpatient rehabilitation and a decision about which facility needed to be made in the next day or two. Then he asked the question they always ask, in the neutral voice they're trained to use. Who's making decisions for her? My sister had her hands folded on the table. She'd had 2 days to become the only voice in that building, and she had used them well. When she spoke to the doctor, warmly, the way you'd speak to a man you were about to relieve of a burden. I am. I've been her caregiver since February. I live in the home, and I have power of attorney. She let that sit for exactly the right length of time. Then, without turning her head, and I'd like my sister removed from the visitor list. She's not a decision maker. She hasn't been part of this, and she's upsetting people who are already at their limit. I'm ready to sign the transfer paperwork today. Nobody said anything. I have been in maybe 400 of these rooms in my life. I know what the silence means when a relative overreaches in front of clinical staff. It lasted about 7 seconds. The air handler cycled on. Somebody's chair leg moved a 1/4 inch on the tile. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't look at my sister. I turned to the advocate in the cardigan, and I asked her one question, in the flattest, most administrative voice I own. Would you pull the advance directive scanned to her chart on March 4th of 2019? Document type is Advance Directive and Healthcare Power of Attorney. It's 4 pages. The agent designation is on page 3. Ivy's fingers were already moving before I finished the sentence. I reached into my bag and unwound the red string from the paper buttons. Figure 8, backwards. I slid the original out and set it on the table, not in front of my sister, in front of the doctor, turned to face him, the way you hand somebody something you want read rather than argued with. 4 pages, blue ink, 2 witness signatures, a notary stamp from a credit union in Bellwood. My mother's initials in the bottom corner of every page in handwriting that sat straight on the line. Ivy turned her laptop around so the table could see the screen. "It's here," she said. "It was received 4 years ago. It's the active one in her record." My sister's smile held for one more second, and then it went out, the way a porch light goes out, not a fade, a stop. What she did next she did in 4 moves, and I'll give them to you in order, because I think anyone who has watched somebody lose a position they thought was secure will recognize every one. First, the tears. Real ones, I think, which is what makes this hard. You weren't here. I have been sleeping in a chair for 2 days. Where were you? And then, to the room, because the room was the point. She calls twice a month. Second, recruitment. She looked at my aunt. Pauline started to say, "Corinne, honey, this really isn't the time for all of," and Brant, the social worker, said, gently, "Ma'am, let's stay with the medical decision-making," and that was the end of that. Third, the newer document. She said she had a power of attorney signed 6 weeks ago, and that a newer one supersedes an older one. Ivy answered before I could, and I have thought since that this was the mercy of the whole morning, that it did not have to come from me. "A general power of attorney covers financial and property matters," she said. "It doesn't replace a healthcare agent designation in an advance directive. Those are separate instruments. For medical decisions, this is the document we follow." And Brant, writing, asked in the same neutral tone, "When was the more recent document signed?" Nobody spoke. Then my brother-in-law, who has never in 20 years been able to hold a silence, said, 6 weeks ago, at the house. The neurologist looked up from his notes. She was admitted 6 weeks ago with delirium secondary to a urinary tract infection, he said, mostly to himself, and then he wrote something down, and the temperature in that room changed by about 10 degrees. Fourth, the threat. Quiet, fast, meant for me. I'll contest it. I let that sit. Then I said the only 2 sentences I'd prepared on the drive, and I said them at the volume you'd use to give somebody directions. You told a nurse I wasn't family. Mom told a notary I was the one she trusted with her breathing. Only one of those is in the chart. Her mouth opened. "I'm not taking anything from you," I said. "You've been in that house since February, and I know what that costs. When she's out of here, we're going to need every hand there is." But she asked me to read the whole thing, and I read it, and I'm going to do what it says. Yolanda reached over and moved the water pitcher a few inches toward my side of the table. That's all. She didn't look at me while she did it. 25 years on a unit teaches you how to vote without raising your hand. My niece got up, walked around the end of the table, and sat down in the empty chair next to mine. If you've ever sat in a room where 11 people went quiet, and the silence itself became the verdict that nobody was willing to say out loud, hit subscribe, or share this with someone who needs to hear it. You'll want to hear what happened next. I didn't drive home that afternoon. I sat with my mother for 40 minutes. Her right hand didn't move. Her left one found my wrist and held it, and she looked at me and made a sound that wasn't a word, and was very clearly a question, and I said, "It's handled. You did it right. You did it 4 years ago." She closed her eyes. Her eyebrows came down the way they used to when she was doing arithmetic. I stopped at a gas station outside Zinnia on the way north. I sat in the car with the engine off, and I wound the red string back around the paper buttons. Figure 8, and my hands were not steady for the first time in 2 days. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel satisfied. I felt winded, the way you do after an argument you would have paid a great deal of money never to have had. Here's what happened over the following months, and I'm going to give it to you plainly, because none of it was satisfying. The unit updated the record to reflect the correct decision-maker, not as a punishment, as a correction, the same way we fix a duplicate entry when one person has been living in a system under 2 names. Brant made a referral to the county's Adult Protective Services regarding the circumstances of the newer document. He told me he was required to. I told him I understood, and I did, and I still went out to my car afterward and sat there for a while. The attorney who drafted that instrument requested the file back for review. The notary's journal was part of it. I don't know how that ended, and I have deliberately not asked. The house never went on the market. My mother's name is still the only one on the deed. My brother-in-law spent about a month at his brother's place and then went back. My aunt stopped forwarding me things. That's a small loss, and it is still a loss. My mother came out of inpatient rehab in 9 weeks with a cane, a right hand that could hold a cup, and maybe 60% of her words. She lives in an assisted living building, 12 minutes from my apartment now. On Sundays, she watches me do her mail and corrects my pronunciation of the pharmacy's name, which she can say perfectly, and I apparently cannot. The message came from my niece in November. No preamble. I didn't know she said that to the nurse until Denny told me. I would have said something. Can I come see Grandma with you Saturday? I read it in my kitchen, and I put the phone down on the counter and stood there for a minute. I didn't celebrate it. I know exactly what it cost a 19-year-old to send that about her own mother. She comes most Saturdays now. She switched her major to nursing, and she has not told her mother yet. If this story reached something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. My sister and I are not reconciled, and I'm not going to sell you a version where we are. In March, I sent her one email. I offered to pay for 4 sessions with an elder care mediator, and I offered to put her on the shared care calendar with full visibility into every appointment, every medication change, every conversation with every doctor. What I did not offer was to put her back in charge, and what I did not offer was to be the one who explains to the aunts why. She wanted me to write that message for her. I said no. That's the part people get wrong about all this. Refusing to be used is not the same as refusing to help. I will drive 111 miles at 5 in the morning for that woman for the rest of her life. I just won't pretend anymore that the driving doesn't count because nobody watched me do it. Was there a moment when you realized that the words your family used for you, practical, capable, good at that, were actually a way of not having to thank you? Tell me about it. I read every one. There's one thing I still don't have. I don't know whether my mother understood what she was signing 6 weeks before that stroke, in a recliner, with a magazine underneath the page for a hard surface. I've read the discharge summary from that admission more times than is healthy. Acute confusion, resolving. Resolving is not a finish line. It's a direction. I'll probably wonder about that for the rest of my life, and I've made a kind of peace with the wondering, but not a good one. Here's what 19 years of records work taught me, and what one Sunday in a windowless room confirmed. The people who hurt you inside a family almost never lie about the big thing. They lie about who you are. They tell a nurse, a neighbor, an aunt, a room, that you're not really part of this, and they say it with such ease that you start checking your own paperwork. The only defense that has ever worked is to make sure that somewhere, before the crisis, in a system nobody can charm, the truth is already written down and time-stamped by someone with nothing to gain. That's my story. I still have that envelope. The string is frayed near one of the buttons now from all the winding, and one of these days it's going to tear straight through, and I already know I'll tape it instead of replacing it. And now I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually answer it. Knowing everything you know now, would you have stopped her in front of all 11 of those people the way I did? Or would you have let her sign the transfer papers, kept the peace in that room, and sorted it out quietly afterward? If this story stayed with you, drop a comment. Tell me one word. Witnessed. Because that's what I want every person watching this to understand. My mother didn't need me to be the loudest one in the hallway. She needed somebody to sit at a kitchen table, read every page, and make sure 2 strangers signed at the bottom while she could still say what she wanted. That's not paperwork. That's the last favor anybody can do for you. This story is fictional, created for dramatic entertainment, education, and reflection. But the lesson underneath it is real. The people who love you quietly are usually the ones who put things in writing, and the day you can't speak for yourself, the only voice in the room will be the one you wrote down.